Hi, welcome to Eagle Point Funding's webinar on federal R&D grants for small businesses. We're going to be focusing today on small business innovation research and small business technology transfer research. Where we're going to start just in a few minutes. It's just interesting to note we have a variety of companies joining us today from a really wide range of industries. Just noticing on the list of registrants, we have companies from a list of really interesting and hot topics to the federal government today. We have companies from advanced materials, from the cyber worlds. We also have AV and AR companies I saw sign up on this list, as well as drone companies. And I believe there's a couple simulation companies as well, as well as a number of advanced material companies. If you look on Eagle Point Funding's website, you can get an idea of the different hot topics for federal funding these days. The list is pretty long, and there's pretty much an interest in every industry. Today, you're joined by myself, Josh Bar-Own, Director of Business Development here at Eagle Point Funding, as well as by our Chief Analyst, Oriel Bar-Oz. We're going to give you a bit of an overview of how federal funding works before we actually jump into the topic today of SBIR and STTR grants, where I think the question I receive most about federal funding is how much money is actually available. And I think the number shocks most people when they hear that the number is in the $176.8 billion. And that's a shock to pretty much all of us, because the federal budget was predicted to be $151 billion, which is nothing to scoff at. But as of March 23rd, just a few weeks ago, the federal budget passed. And it was over $20 billion more than we were expecting for R&D. Realistically, not all of this money is going to private companies. Roughly somewhere between $60 and $70 billion go, and the estimates are hard to gauge for a reason, because the big machine, and that big machine has a lot of moving parts. But we see that there's a tremendous amount of opportunity available for the private industry. The rest of the funds go to universities and college, as well as each federal agency themselves have an intramural or internal R&D office. When we look at our topic today of SBIR and STTR, you might be shocked to find that it's actually a very small percentage of the grant funds available. SBIR itself is only 3.2% of the funds, which is actually, it's even less than that when it's really only 3.2% of the federal agencies that have a budget of more than $100 million for extramural R&D, which is almost every federal agency, but still it's a relatively small chunk of the pie, and STTR is an even smaller chunk, just less than a percent. And where is most of the money going? Most of the money is going to companies through broad agency announcements, which are a mechanism that is used, literally there are thousands of them each year, where there's a broad announcement from this agency, such as the DoD, the Department of Defense, or the Department of Energy, another department similar to that with a big budget, offering grants that typically have a very high ceiling in the millions of dollars per grant. SBIR, though, is an extremely effective measure, which we're going to be talking about just in a few minutes. Beyond the scale of funding that you're receiving is the quality of funding that you're receiving. It's something to take a look at a deeper level, because the typical funding for sources that we know of are what we call dilutive funding. And this is, for instance, venture capital, which is a very typical funding source for a young startup or even for an established company. Angel investors for an even earlier stage, but there's also bank loans and similar mechanisms which dilute your company, and they dilute your company in a number of ways. The first of which is a transfer of equity. you, the company, receive a certain amount of capital, and that capital is contingent on transfer of percentage or revenue, or if the company makes an exit at a later stage, a certain percentage of that belongs to those initial investors. But the dilution of control is another added factor here, because often once you have a venture capitalist or a venture capital fund involved in your company, it comes with advisors and additional board members. And there's also a question of what happens with the IP of your company. Not so when it comes to non-dilutive funding, where other than federal grants, the most similar funding mechanism which is within the category of non-dilutive funding is family, where there is no equity transfer and there's no expectation of it. You just receive funds in the form of a grant, and there's also no outside interference. There's no additional board members or advisors that come and meddle in with your technology. And the federal government encourages you to maintain all rights. So the question that I'm usually asked following this is, why is the government doing this? Why is the government investing itself? And I noticed that only just now I'm seeing that you guys are a few slides behind. So let me just take you through what I showed you in the earlier state of the beautiful pictures of me and Oriel, the chief analyst here, showing the federal budget and how it breaks down, as well as the R&D grant mechanisms. Sorry for the technological difficulties here. And here we see the equity funding versus federal grants. The motives we mentioned before is basically to advance knowledge and technology as a whole. The federal government is investing in small businesses, or large businesses for that matter, because they know that that is a mechanism to advance knowledge and technology for the world as a whole, but also within the internal borders of the United States. The government knows that by creating a strong industry through small and large businesses, it creates a strong economy. Beyond that, we know that with this knowledge and technology, it will create an improved quality of life for U.S. citizens. But there's also an economical interest for the federal government. And the government has found that they have a return of investment. For every dollar they invest in companies, they receive $2.30 back. How? Well, first and foremost, by job creation itself, but also by creating or helping and enabling a company to create a product, and that product sells and collects taxes. So the federal government also has an economic interest when it comes to federal grants. And as far as the companies go, the additional value of grants goes far beyond the initial investment that you receive when you receive a federal grant. And this is an interesting study put forth by the Milken Institute, where they found that for every dollar a private company received in federal funds, they were able to net 8 times as much from the private sector in investments for their R&D for the 8 years following the grant they received. And this is very simple. Federal grants are viewed by investors as a clear hallmark of quality. Once private investors hear that you receive a federal grant, they are often piqued and they want to run and support your business, because they think that that's a really interesting and good moneymaker if it was able to draw the attention of the federal government. So now let's take a look at Small Business Innovation Research, SBIR. This is our topic for today. First and foremost, we know that the interest of the Small Business Association, which funds the SBIR, is to support R&D and financing of cutting-edge technology. They're looking to invest in revolutionary technology. As they say it, their mission is to support scientific excellence and technological innovation through the investment of federal research funds in critical American priorities to build a strong national economy, one business at a time. And we know annually that number runs around $2.5 billion. This data is from 2015. So realistically, with the increased budget, we're probably looking at a number which is much larger than that. But there's roughly 2.5. Let's take that number as a given statistic, which can be spread out amongst different small businesses which have this cutting edge technology. To date, there have been over 160,000 awards granted, totaling over $43 billion. Like I said, these dates, this is statistics from 2015, and needs to be updated sometime soon. The 4 goals of the program are to meet federal research and development needs, to increase private sector commercialization of innovation derived from federal research and development funding. In other words, to let businesses do what they do best, which is create, to stimulate technological innovation, and to foster and encourage participation in innovation and entrepreneurship by socially and economically disadvantaged persons. And yes, the SBIR mechanism is a mechanism for all small businesses that might have a disadvantage when it comes to bigger fish in the market, but also they want to encourage women and minority-owned as well as veteran-owned businesses. And when we take a look at the different companies that got an interesting start by small business innovation research funds, we see Lyft, we see Qualcomm. These very big, influential companies, they actually got an early start when it comes from federal funds and federal sources. So I want to introduce Oriel Barros, our chief analyst here, and he's going to talk a little bit more about small business innovation research. Welcome, Oriel.
Okay, so thank you, Josh, for that introduction and overview. And thank you, everyone, for joining our webinar this time about SBIR and its opportunities. I'll take you on a short tour, hopefully drill down a bit further from the technical and technological side to give you a bit more of an idea of what this program offers you, the companies. So what you can see on the screen right now are the federal agencies that participate in the SBIR program. I won't go through all of them. The main one in most cases is the DoD. However, and obviously not the only one, so be not alarmed if you don't necessarily find yourself developing technologies that deal with defense. There is a lot of interest from other federal agencies in current R&D. So all of the agencies you can see on the screen right now have extramural budgets of at least $100 million annually. At least $100 million. That means that in the end, they fund R&D companies in the billions of dollars, both companies and universities through the SBIR and STTR mechanisms, which we'll go into a bit further in this presentation. So moving along, about the STTR, we covered the SBIR slightly so far. The STTR program is a subset of the SBIR, or its little brother, you could say. This program is meant to assist companies with citing or cooperating with research institutes as well as academia, and transfer technology from the theoretical or research side into the commercial side. And this is exactly what the STTR stands for. This assists in putting key technology in the hands of small businesses to accelerate and innovate their R&D. It is smaller than the SBIR mechanism, but for companies that are in their first steps of R&D or have firm footing in academia and research institutes, this serves as a very, very useful tool to assist them with taking their technology and products to the next phase. You can see it's a sister set-aside program assisting R&D and cooperation between small businesses and research institutions. So it's a smaller subset, but a very useful one as well. Moving along, what you can see on the screen right now is the total $2.5 billion for fiscal year 2015 across all agencies, covering both grants and contracts. So as we said before, all agencies have an extramural budget of at least 100 million, but what you can see on the screen is that some of them, especially the HHS and the DOE, and obviously the DoD, may exceed that budget by a lot. In other words, what they actually provide companies in terms of support is in the billions of dollars. So this has a dramatic effect on small businesses using these instruments, as well as mentioning the fact that 2018 is set to have an even larger budget when compared to 2015. Now, the SBIR and STTR program is a gated process, has 3 major phases, phase 1, 2, and phase 3. It also has a fast track, which I'll mention briefly. Phase 1 is used for concept development. It covers 6 months of R&D work, and in most cases, it covers a grant of up to $150,000. So this is for the basic or first steps in R&D for small businesses. However, you can win more than a single SBIR award. So if you've already won one, it doesn't necessarily mean you can't do it again. Furthermore, some companies, some small businesses build their entire business model on the phase 1 part of this program, some of them winning up to 10 or even 20 phase 1 awards, which comes to significant amounts of money. When reaching phase 2, this is for a prototype development. It covers 24 months, and usually awards are in the realm of $500,000 to $1 million, but it's not capped. Some companies receive upwards of $1 million. So again, this is another opportunity for submitting several times and receiving several awards. In phase 3, there is no funding, no further funding, but only assistance in commercialization. And as I said before, there is also a fast track option, which covers a submission of phase 1 and 2 combined, and it does have some limitations, and both in terms of the company itself and the timeline, but it does, if you qualify, serve for faster and at times easier funding. So moving along, I promised I'd take you on a drill down. So what you can see on the screen right now are some examples that we pulled out from the SBIR website itself, from their portal, and it describes several past awards. You can access it yourself. It's free to the public. So what we did is pull out some examples of companies that won in 2016, 2017. You can see 3 examples of phase 2 awards and 1 example of a phase 1 award. In all of these cases, you can see that they've exceeded the usual limitation. As I said, it's not a hard limit. Usually phase 1 receives no more than $150,000 per company. The example on the screen, the 4th one on the list, the last one, is just shy of $230,000, and all phase 2 companies on the screen received around $1.5 million in funding. So again, these are not the only examples. There are hundreds and sometimes thousands of examples that are in the same realm of funding. Also, it's worth pointing out that we chose to focus our attention in 2 topics. You can see on the screen: drone technology, or UASs, and also cyber technology. These two are very, very hot topics at the moment, with a lot of opportunities, and as such, a lot of interest and support from the federal government. However, obviously, these are not the only topics currently being covered by them. Also, as I mentioned before, not only the DoD covers grants. You can see the DOE is also on the screen right now, and DARPA is here also mentioned. So what this comes to show you is that, again, there is a lot of money on the floor. A lot of agencies are interested in new technologies and willing to provide the funds and support for companies in this sphere of technology.
So if we ask the question of who qualifies as a small business, well, first and foremost, we're talking about businesses that could be as many as 500, but typically are far fewer. But the cap is a company of no larger than 500 employees. We're talking about companies which are defined as for-profit, private industry businesses, where the work has to be done within the United States. There is also another stipulation that the company itself needs to be 50% or more owned by U.S. citizens, as well as by individuals, and not owned by venture capital funds, etc. What does it mean to be an investigator? We're talking about research and development grants. Well, you don't have to be a PhD or an MD. You have to have the requisite experience to have the expertise as well in order to oversee the project, both from a scientific as well as a technological and technical component. The typical process is pretty standard. There is a solicitation of different topics. You submit a proposal for that. It undergoes a series of evaluations by the agency and the principal officer charged to the particular grant. And then you receive either a phase 1 or phase 2 award, or, as Oriel mentioned before, the fast track. So now that we've covered federal grants as a whole, we didn't talk too much about the broad agency announcements, which as we mentioned earlier, is actually the overwhelming majority of the funds available. We just talked about SBIR, but what we're going to talk about now is relevant for all grants. And we know that everyone should apply. If you're a small business, you should definitely be applying for SBIR as well as for broad agency announcement opportunities. But not everybody does. And the question is why? And I think when we look at it, it really boils down to two key challenges that companies face when they go after federal funds for their R&D. The first of which, it's hard to identify opportunities. As we mentioned before, we're talking about a pool of billions and billions of dollars. And as a result, there are many competing agencies that are involved in these different grant opportunities, and it's hard to have one portal which contains it all. And as a result, it's hard to identify opportunities just because of the sheer mass, but also because of the bureaucratic reality of the federal government. On top of that, there's a low per submission success rate when you go out on your own. Some government agencies have a per submission success rate of in the single digits, whereas I think the highest ones we see are in the low double digits, 10, 11, 12%. We want to talk about what's led to Eagle Point's success, and I think it's something that could be easily applicable for other companies, though it involves a tremendous amount of work if you're going to go out about it at your own. And the first of this formula is to know the federal system and to know it really well. And that includes going beyond SBIR, but also within SBIR, you need to know the agency history, you need to know what you're looking for, and you need to know, of course, where to look. And this is key because there's not just one portal, there are many different portals, and you need to know how to go about that. As a company, you yourself have to clarify your vision as well as your capabilities. What have you done till now, and what do you plan on to do in the future, you need to have a very clear and a revolutionary roadmap, which is the third point. You have multiple opportunities that match your roadmap. In other words, you have to really hammer down where you want to go in the next couple of years in order to present it in the most fitting and reasonable manner to the federal agencies themselves. And lastly, and this is the most important component that we found and has led to our success, is you need to engage in a long-term multi-submission strategy. As I mentioned before, one of the key pitfalls of applying for federal grants is that there's a low per submission success rate. And the only way to overcome that is to have a long-term and multi-submission strategy, going after not just one grant, but going after multiple grants in succession. A little bit about us. Eagle Point Funding is the biggest consulting firm of its kind, specializing in non-dilutive funding. We have just about 20 years of experience, 70 plus full-time employees, and over 250 active clients. I mentioned before what the success rates are when you go at it on your own. We have a considerably higher success rate, between 25 to 30% per submission, but that is still not enough. You need to engage in a multi-submission strategy in order to maximize your success rate. And for us, we found that our multi-submission strategy of more than 4 grant applications in a year lead to at least one award for 64% of our clients per year. This long-term approach is key to it, and to date we've been able to successfully lead to over $1.5 billion in awards for our clients and roughly $70 million last year alone. Our business model is success-oriented, of course, because we're in it to win it with our clients. Now, just a little bit with Q&A with Oriel. If you have any questions, it's a great time to put it in the question box. But first, before we get to that, Oriel, I just wanted to ask you a little bit more. Maybe you could clarify just what is it that the federal agencies are looking for when they're analyzing a grant submission?
Okay, so thank you for that question. It's a great question. I actually get asked that question quite a lot because sometimes it's not that obvious what they're looking for. So in general terms, what they're looking for, the federal government is looking for evolutionary technology, anything that is innovative, and that is in contrast to evolutionary technology. They're not looking for something that is just about to become a product and it's almost done and you just need to package it nicely and so to speak and then ship it along. They're looking for a bit of risk, a bit of a lot of innovation, and something that will make a change, make an impact in the field, in the market, and show us some new technological capabilities, new tools, new algorithms, new ways of thinking about problems, new communication solutions, and so on and so forth. They are not looking for manufacturing. And sometimes I get asked about the specific point of integration because that's a bit of gray area, and that depends. It depends on what kind of technology you're integrating. Has anyone done it before, and how hard is it to actually achieve integration with existing technologies? So that's a bit of a gray area. So what in essence they're looking for is something bold and new. If that's what you're doing, then SBIR and federal grants in general are for you.
Okay, we have a question here. How long does it take to go from submitting to funding in the bank? I'll take this one. This is an excellent question. Federal grants, first and foremost, is a long-term play, and it's important to know that when you get involved with any applications for federal grants, specifically for the SBIR mechanism, usually you receive a response from the federal government for the agency that you're applying to within somewhere between 60 and 100 days, and it can take usually another month or two in addition to that until you actually receive the money in your bank. Oriel, I wanted to ask you another follow-up question. We hear, I guess, often that SBIR can be a strategy to receive more grants. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Sure, sure. Okay, so usually you can look at that in two ways. First, from the standpoint of the company itself that's applying for SBIR status or SBIR grants, obviously. If and when you successfully achieve SBIR funding, over time you achieve focus and experience in successfully securing grants, and that helps you in securing additional grants, whether they be additional phase 1, phase 2 SBIR grants, or broader agency announcements that are not a part of the SBIR program. So that's the first part of the answer. It just helps the company gain experience in securing grants. From the other end, from the standpoint of, say, outside investors or the federal government itself, once you successfully secure SBIR grant or funding, that serves as, in a way, a stamp of approval or a stamp of excellence. It means that what you've developed so far has gained the attention of a federal agency. It's been scrutinized and reviewed, and it was good enough for one agency. It may be good enough for another agency or for another investor or for another grant opportunity. So when looking at the SBIR from this perspective, it serves as a key that opens the gate for additional funding.
Oh, thank you very much. Okay, we have another question here. It's from Kyle. Kyle asks if we have a product that is already in production on the market, but we have benefits that require this type of R&D and risk. Can those be candidates for SBIR grants? Excellent question. Just to clarify the question for the rest of our attendees, the question is, if you have a ready product but that needs some further elaboration, can that be a candidate for SBIR? It's an excellent question. The answer in standing on one leg is that you can't get any sort of federal grants for R&D for an existing product or to commercialize a product that you've already developed. The federal government is looking to invest in relatively early stage for the most part. That's not all true, but for the most part, looking for early stage or pre-stage technology. However, and this is an important point, the fact that you have a product in the market and you probably have a beta version of your existing product is usually an encouraging sign. It shows that you have experience in developing the said technology, and if that justifies a long-term R&D of at least a year or two, then that is something that could qualify for federal funding. Okay, I think that's it for questions. If you have any more questions, obviously you can email me directly at josh@EaglePointFunding. Just a quick mention of our upcoming webinars. We're going to be focusing, and this is the second viewing, but due to popular request, we're going to be honing in on cybersecurity R&D. Just a teaser for that. We know the federal government has allocated over $14 billion of funds for cybersecurity alone, not just R&D, but R&D as well as contracts. But a significant chunk of that is expected to go towards R&D in 2018 alone, and that budget is really interesting because it's up from last year. We're also going to be continuing with part 2 of our SBIR series, which is funding beyond SBIR. We mentioned it today that SBIR and STTR is a combined 3.6% of the federal budget for R&D funding. So we're going to be exploring the other 96.4% of federal funding opportunities, and that's going to be on June 13th. If you are interested, I mentioned it a little bit earlier on, and you want to see different interesting topics or hot topics for the federal government, you can go directly to our website. It's eaglepointfunding.com. and go to markets of interest and get an idea of whether or not you are currently in a market or desire to develop something within a market which is of a special interest to the federal government. If you have questions about your company's eligibility, or if you want to explore federal funding opportunities of SBIR and beyond SBIR, you're more than welcome to either book a meeting directly with me through my calendar, and I'll leave it up here for the next few minutes just so you can write it down, or you can send me an email directly at josh@eaglepointfunding.com, or visit us at our website, www.eaglepointfunding.com. Thank you for joining us, and we're happy to be your desk for all federal grant matters.